Welcome back, everybody. We continue to follow breaking news. CBS News learning that Paul Whelan, an American who had been in prison in Russia for nearly 6 years, and Wall Street Journal reporter Evan Gershkovich, who was just sentenced by Russia to 16 years in a maximum security prison, are both part of a prisoner swap. Gershkovich, the Journal, and the State Department have consistently said the charges are false and he had a sham trial. The United States says Whelan has been wrongfully detained for nearly 6 years. CBS News intelligence and national security reporter Olivia Gazis joins us now. Olivia, for anyone just joining us, give us some of the top lines of what we know right now.
Sure, Lindsay. Well, U.S. officials who have been intimately involved in this months-long negotiation process have described it to me as the most complex in U.S. Russian history and even U.S. Soviet history, which, as we know, the spy swaps at that time were legion. This one outdoes that one, any of those, because of how many players are involved and the types of prisoners that have been involved. These are not strictly spies that we're talking about. We are talking about political prisoners, and their cases are necessarily more fraught in negotiation. The Russians can be more capricious in who they hold for what reason, and that's one of the reasons why this case has officials expressing just how difficult it was to get over the finish line. Speculation had been mounting over the course of this week that some kind of a deal was afoot. Russian prisoners started disappearing off of their prison rosters. Prominent political dissidents, suddenly their whereabouts were unknown. Among them, among the prisoners whose names started disappearing were Paul Whelan and Vladimir Kara-Murza, a prominent Kremlin critic who we understand may be part of these negotiations as well. So we're waiting for the full details on what Russia is receiving in exchange. But what we do know is that 3 American citizens are set to set foot on American soil, hopefully in a matter of hours.
Olivia, do we know who in the administration and U.S. government has been taking the lead on these negotiations? And what have we reported in the past on negotiations and sort of the steps that led us here?
Sure. Well, we know that in the past this has involved a whole of government undertaking. So the White House, the State Department, and when it comes to the Russians, usually the Central Intelligence Agency, the CIA, are going to be involved. And that's what we understand to have been the case here. So that is multiple agencies handling multiple parts of this negotiation, the diplomacy of it, the deals that ultimately needed to be struck, the logistics of where these prisoners might actually wind up being physically escorted to their respective modes of transportation. We also needed to understand what the Russians would ultimately agree with in order to free the Americans they were holding. They had been resistant to any deals that had been put on the table in the past, and U.S. officials have made clear that they believe they were putting significant offers on the table that the Russians had repeatedly rebuffed.
Olivia Gazis, thank you. I want to bring back William Pomeranz. He's a senior fellow and former director of the Wilson Center's Kennan Institute. What do we know about what will happen in the coming hours? If anything, this appears to be very secretive for good reason.
Well, we just have to make sure that all the people who are in this swap actually get on the plane and get sent to the United States and to their families. So it is a long process. For those of us who remember the Cold War, it was a very tricky process, and it always involved transitions and exchanges that took place mainly in East Germany. So I think that we're just waiting to see how the swap takes place, who is going to be involved in the swap, and what is the aftermath of the swap. I do not expect that it will be improved U.S.-Russian relations because of all the things that Vladimir Putin has done, both in the Ukraine and basically arresting and using these prisoners as hostages.
You have written extensively about the rule of law in Russia. What can you tell us about their judicial system and the trials for Gershkovich and Whelan, which the U.S. claim are sham trials?
Well, they are sham trials, and Russia has essentially a 99% conviction rate for criminal offenses. So it was inevitable that these people would be convicted. They aren't able to put up a defense. They are not able to see a lot of the evidence. So it was not a fair and open process. And that is a tendency that has long predated these cases, both in the Soviet Union and in the Russian Empire.
William, thank you. I want to bring back John Sullivan. He was U.S. ambassador to Russia from 2020 to 2022. He is now a CBS News contributor. Ambassador, do I have you?
Yes, you do. Good to be with you.
Thank you so much for joining us again. I want to ask you about the other countries that are involved in this, particularly Germany. We know that one dangerous prisoner that Putin wanted back was in jail, convicted of murder in Germany. What would Germany have to gain by agreeing to cooperate in this with the United States?
Well, yes,
Okay.
this is a big deal for the German government. When I was U.S. ambassador to Russia, I developed a very close relationship with the German ambassador, and we talked a lot about this case. This fellow, Krasakov, he's a colonel in the FSB, which is the principal successor to the KGB. He was sent by the Russian government to commit murder in a park in Berlin. He shot a Russian dissident to death on the orders of the Kremlin, and he's a colonel in the FSB. This was a state-ordered assassination on German territory. It greatly upset Chancellor Merkel and her government, and the KGB officer was given a life sentence. And now, for the Germans to release this individual, it's a very, very significant thing. My expectation is that there may be other Germans, for example. I understand there's a German who maybe have been detained in Belarus and actually given a death sentence, who may be released by the Belarusian government, which is just an indication of why this is such a complex deal. If it turns out to be what we're hearing through the grapevine, it would involve, for example, releasing detainees from potentially another country.
Will Krasakov return to Russia a hero? And maybe history can be our guide. Did Victor Bout, the notorious arms dealer who was released as part of the Brittany Griner swap, return to Russia as a hero?
I am confident in predicting he will not only return as a hero, he will be celebrated, at least in private, by President Putin himself. Putin is a Chekist, a KGB officer for decades. He's famously said there's no such thing as a former KGB man. This guy Krasakov is one of Putin's fellow Chekists. He will be welcomed back as a hero, including by the president of the Russian Federation, which just goes to show what the state of U.S. Russia relations is. Putin believes, to his core, that Russia is at war with the United States and the West. And the way he would view these exchanges, these are like prisoner of war exchanges during wartime. This is not the case of there's a potential for U.S.-Russia relations to improve. As my friend Will Pomeranz said a little while ago, this is just a step in a very fraught relationship, and I don't expect U.S.-Russia relations to improve.
We're looking right now on the ground in Turkey at a shot that our camera has of a tarmac there. Possible that one of the prisoners are on board one of these planes. Of course, this is being done behind closed doors, out of view, for a reason. This is sensitive. This is complex. And I want to ask you how significant it is that a country like Turkey is a part of this.
Well, it is significant and, again, increases the complexity of the deal. It was complex when we did a one-for-one trade back in the spring of 2022 when Trevor Reed was traded for Konstantin Yaroshenko, who was convicted in the United States of a major narcotics trafficking conspiracy. That trade occurred in Ankara, I expect at the same airport, maybe even in exactly the same location. The Turkish government was involved, and a one-for-one trade like that was a very complex undertaking. What we're witnessing today is far more complex, but we do have the muscle memory for doing this type of trade in Turkey, in Ankara, because that's where Trevor Reed was recovered by the United States.
Ambassador, thank you, sir.
My pleasure.